Hi, ladies and gentlemen. Terry Martin with the Illinois Channel, and once again, I'm joined with Jeff Berkowitz with Public Affairs TV in Chicago. And Jeff has been somewhat busy over the last couple of weeks, so Jeff and I have not been doing our show for a while, but welcome back to our viewers. We all hope you had a great 4th of July, and Jeff, we're going to play a clip at some point here of an interview, two-part interview you did with Bob Fioretti, who was the Republican nominee for Attorney General of Illinois. And that interview fits into the theme of what we're going to be talking about today, which is basically, as it says right above here, confronting fraud and corruption in government. And there's been kind of a series of things happening that is why you and I will be talking about this. One of them, just so I can bring this up to tee you up in a second, is that State Representative Carol Ammons has been indicted on allegations of corruption. Also, on July the 3rd, State Representative Harry Benton, seen here, he resigned, kind of forced out by his Democrat colleagues in the Illinois House of Representatives on allegations of improper conduct. So Harry Benton is out. Carol Ammons is still in office. And let's start with her and what the federal government is alleging in their investigation. What you've taken a look at that, so what can you tell us?
State Representative Carol Ammons, Democrat, downstate, Democrat from Urbana, and her husband, Champaign County Clerk, Aaron Ammons, are the targets of a federal indictment, a 12-page federal indictment coming out of the Central District of Illinois, which came out on July 8th, about a week ago. We're taping this on July 16th. Representative Ammons was indicted on 8 counts of wire fraud, 1 count of making false statements to an FBI agent, and conspiracy to obstruct justice. The federal prosecutors allege that Illinois State Representative Ammons misused campaign contributions and state grant funding to financially benefit herself and her family, receiving cash kickbacks in return. Those are the allegations of the 12-page indictment, and included, and that is Aaron Ammons was charged with 1 count of conspiracy to obstruct justice and 1 count of obstruction of justice for allegedly attempting to impede an FBI investigation of the Biden administration in 2024 and the Biden Department of Justice in 2024 that's carried over to the current. Big news, and I might just
I want to be clear here, what you just said about the Biden administration. Who started this investigation? Was it the Trump DOJ or the Biden DOJ?
I believe, since these things I've just referred to were being investigated as early as 2024, which would be the Biden administration FBI, Biden Department of DOJ. Trump's clearly was not elected until
November
he was
of that
elected
year.
In November.
I just want to make it clear
he didn't
because
become president
people are going to be saying that Trump is using DOJ to target political opponents. I doubt the president of the United States knows who Representative Ammons is. So it's important that we bring that up. And look, in the large context of things, we obviously want there to be some entity, the DOJ, or it could be the Attorney General of Illinois, who whoever that would be. We want people to be investigating allegations of corruption within government, and that is a developing theme, which is why you and I are talking about this. So,
right. One thing we don't know, Terry, is we know they were investigating, but had Kamala Harris won and the Democrats retained power in 2025, would the Harris FBI and Harris Department of Justice have a U.S. attorney from the Central District of Illinois who would issue this 12-page indictment? We don't know. We hope that would be the case, that it would be an impartial administration of justice. But one thing we do know, Terry, because you and I have talked about this for years, at least recently, into extending years. This is what happens. Speak for myself, and then you can chime in. This is what happens when you don't have regular order, when you have supra-majorities for a long, long time of the Democratic Party. And so you don't have hearings that conduct proper oversight of grants and how they're issued and what state representatives are doing and who is holding those state reps and those state senators accountable. What is the Speaker, Chris Welch, doing, not when there's an indictment, but before? What is Senate President Don Harmon, both Democrats, doing before the indictment? What is Governor J.B. Pritzker, Democrat, doing over the last 8 years, including this period of 2024 when we were describing this investigation? This is what happens when you don't have the appropriate enforcement of the laws of the United States of America and of the state of Illinois. When's the last time you heard the Attorney General of the state of Illinois, who's also been there for 8 years, Kwame Raoul, say anything resembling to what I just said? And are you paying any attention to what, folks, you out there, Democrats and Republicans, are you paying any attention to the race for the Illinois Attorney General as Kwame Raoul, the incumbent, attempts to retain that office and defeat his challenger, Bob Fioretti, and we'll have more about that shortly.
Yeah, and so look, here's the thing. There's always been some level of corruption in government, going back to the Romans, but we have to have some mechanism to be looking at that. And in the last 20 years or so, it seems as if the federal government, and to some extent the state of government as well, people have not been enforcing the laws, have not been looking critically at what's been going on behind the scenes. We know former New Jersey Senator Bob Menendez is now sitting in a jail cell for corruption for taking briberies because he was prosecuted by the federal government in the Biden administration. And we have had a number of Illinois House lawmakers in both the Senate and the Illinois House over the last 20 years be indicted and removed from office. And so obviously there is corruption in government. And I would say it happens at the state level, at the local level, in municipal government. We've seen corruption go on there over the years. And there has to be some kind of as a nation, we have to look at this and say, yes, we want not our law enforcement, not our prosecutors to be using prosecution for political purposes, but to weed out corruption. And it seems like it's been an awful lot of corruption going on, as we see around the country in Minnesota and elsewhere. One of the things, Jeff, you did just recently interview Bob Fioretti, the Republican nominee for Attorney General of Illinois. And you talked before I have a clip here where he's talking about sanctuary cities and the lack of enforcement of the law, because the sanctuary cities are not enforcing federal laws, which they should, the law enforcement in Illinois. Give us your background on the interview and your thoughts before I play the clip.
Well, there are several. The main thing to think about when you folks who watch the clip and hopefully watch the full two-part show, part one and part two of our interview, the overview of those four things, just to give you some insight, is that the Attorney General, that office has tremendous power that has not been used for good, And Bob Fioretti points that out. For instance, in the education, Terry and I have talked a lot and about wire points and the research they have done, and Ted Dabrowski and his run for governor, that our kids can't read and they can't do math proficiently. And you might say, hey, Jeff, what the hell does that have to do with the Attorney General? But as Bob said, the code, the education code, the code of the law that sets out the powers of the Attorney General, he has the ability to file a complaint and say that government entities have been the victims of a failure of breach of contract. There are contracts and the various districts of education throughout the state of Illinois.
So let's take an example. The Chicago Public Schools. He is alleging that as Attorney General, any Attorney General could bring a lawsuit saying the city of Chicago is paying for these children to be taught. They are failing. The teaching system is failing to educate these kids. We know from testing that they're doing math below grade level, they're reading below grade level, and when that is consistently happening over a prolonged period of time, a lawsuit could be brought to say that you are accepting funds without providing the services you are being paid for. Is that the gist of it?
Yeah, and that's an important point, because you could do something about only 40% of the kids across the state of Illinois reading at grade level and 60% not. And the same on the math, and probably the same on writing. And I haven't heard a word from this Attorney General in 8 years.
Which Attorney General is this Attorney General?
That would be Kwame Raoul, who's been there for 8 years, as has the Governor Pritzker. He talks about how much we spend and how much more we've spent under his administration, Governor Pritzker, but he doesn't talk about the outcomes. And when he says we're fifth in the country, I think he means in spending, not in producing quality results.
Yeah, let me, in this clip I'm going to show, which is a long clip, it runs about a minute and a half, but we hear both from you and Bob Fioretti. He's talking about the Supremacy Clause, which means that federal law trumps local law. And it's the U.S. Constitution that is the ultimate law of the land. That is the supremacy of the federal government. Laws have to be followed, and they're not being followed. They're not being followed in the city of Chicago. They're not being followed in the state of Illinois when it comes to working with federal authorities on illegal immigration. So here, Bob is talking about this. Let me play the clip, and we'll get your thoughts after.
Clause, it's pretty easy. The answer is they have the authority to do that, period.
Who has the authority?
The federal government, the ICE agents.
But first, the county people who have the sheriff, somebody who has control of that county jail, has to give the feds a call and say, we got a guy here. He seems to be dangerous. I think we'll want to take over. And if you folks want to prosecute, then you can do that. Would you advise the counties and their jails to do that, work with ICE? And are they doing that? Well, they're doing it in Indiana, other states. They're doing it in Florida. They're doing it in Tennessee. They don't seem to have the problems we're having, but they're not doing it in Illinois, right?
That is correct.
State, right?
Well, that is correct too. But then, because nobody's saying the Supremacy Clause has a greater role than what's happening here in the state over the Trust Act.
Enter Bob Fioretti, Illinois Attorney General. If you're the Illinois Attorney General, and that's not happening, you could file a lawsuit, right, on behalf of the people.
That is
right?
correct. Yep.
And would you do that?
Yes.
And what would you ask?
Well, you're saying, what would I ask? Well, again, I'm not going to speculate, but I'm going to tell you, it's wrong. Number one, they have the authority to do what they need to do to capture and deal with the violent, illegal immigrants that have come into this city, come into this state, and bring them under custody.
So, Jeff, before we move along to some of the other parts of our show, what more could you tell us, if anything, you want to say about Bob Fioretti?
Well, I just want to emphasize what he's saying here is that the Illinois Attorney General could file suit to try to get the courts involved with this issue that's come up, and we hear about it, this violence, these confrontations that are occurring between ICE and protesters and people attempting to obstruct justice. And maybe somehow as a result of that, raise the issue of that complaint, raise the issue of the Supremacy Clause in the United States. You know, that immigration is something that's federal, and if they're confronted, the feds are confronted by the sanctuary state of Illinois, sanctuary city of Chicago, it impedes, it interrupts the regular order of things where people, local officials, retaining or detaining violent illegal immigrants want to call up the feds, call up ICE and say, here they are. If you folks want to pursue this and prosecute, come and get them. But they don't do that.
They don't
They
do
say
it, but
can't
they
because
do in other states, and they do in Texas, and they do in Tennessee, and they do, in Florida. And in many states, they are cooperating, local authorities, with the feds so that when an illegal immigrant is arrested, and in so many of these cases, they're arrested because they committed a specific crime, they ought to be handed over to the feds according to our system of justice. And in those states where they are cooperating, you don't have all of this rioting going on and demonstrations. And as we saw in Minnesota, obstruction of justice, and here we end up with Miss Good being shot to death. We had another young fellow, name escapes me at the moment, in Minnesota, 38 years old, and he was shot for interfering with law enforcement. People are dying because we're not cooperating here. This is a very serious, and there's a right way to do things and a wrong way to do. This idea that we're going to have sanctuary cities, not just on immigration, but on anything. I mean, imagine if we had a sanctuary city where they said we're not going to pay federal income taxes. You don't have the right to do that. You don't have the right to do what the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois is doing on this issue of immigration. That's not how our legal system is supposed to work.
I'll just say the roots of this problem, if you watch that clip, you'll see in the background there's a slide which came from WirePoints that showed the difference in illegal immigrants entering this country under Biden, or the Biden tenure, and under the prior Trump tenure. And so we had, and you see this in the chart, under the Biden administration, approximately 8 to 12 million, essentially unvetted illegal immigrants coming into this country. And now we have 8 to 12 million, the results of that, the residue of that, these illegal immigrants who are unvetted are now within our interior. And how do we identify them? Are they dangerous? And how would we do something about it?
Look, what was
So
the?
there you are. Those are the roots of the problem. That's all I'm saying.
That is the roots. And look at the implications. And you may remember the name while I'm saying this. I can't think of her name right now. But the Loyola student who in Chicago,
Sheridan
Gorman, was just recently killed by an illegal immigrant. What do we say to her family? And the others who were killed? This is life and death on both sides of the aisle, but these sanctuary cities are creating real problems. Now, we're talking about corruption and confronting fraud and corruption. Yesterday, as it turned out, on the 16th of July, or the 15th of July, I should say, we had a hearing in the U.S. Senate Judiciary Committee where we were hearing about the nominee for Attorney General, Mr. Todd Blanche, who has been the acting Attorney General, but now he's nominated to be officially the U.S. Attorney General. And one of those commenting in that hearing was Missouri Senator Eric Schmidt, and he talks about these allegations that some of the Democrats in the committee were making that this is a horrible DOJ under the Trump administration. I want to remind people that Eric Schmidt, before he became a U.S. Senator, was also the Attorney General of Missouri. So he comes with that credibility behind him. Let's listen to what he said on the allegations of the Trump DOJ.
I heard one of my colleagues say that this is the most troubled Department of Justice in history. I happen to live through the previous administration where you had a Department of Justice completely weaponized against political opponents. They tried to throw their chief political opponent in jail, ruin his family's lives. You were his lawyer to see some of that, and I was with you in a courtroom in New York to witness that defense in one of those cases. Were aimed against Catholics in this country who happen to attend a traditional Catholic Latin Mass, went after parents under the Patriot Act for showing up to school board meetings to object to critical race theory or the masking of their kids. We lived through Jack Smith, and the chairman has just revealed new revelations, of course, that he was reading text messages. By the way, Jack Smith testified under oath he didn't do that. He testified that they just had the phone logs. We know that's not true now. Jack Smith should be subject to prosecution for lying to Congress. So
even Jack Smith, federal prosecutor, might be brought up on charges of lying to Congress. And this level of spying has been discussed in various. Arctic Frost was the name given to this spying on members of Congress. We had Josh Hawley just posted yesterday this picture, the other senator, by the way, from Missouri. And he says here, Joe Biden's DOJ not only tapped my phone, I just learned they illegally obtained my texts with members of President Trump's administration. Everyone involved here needs to be prosecuted. And so, Jeff, you know, the Department of Justice under the Biden administration has, let's say, a lot of dirt on their hands, and we're doing things, as Senator Schmidt just went over, that certainly smacked of political corruption and using the Department of Justice for political purposes.
Yeah, it's kind of ironic. It really is kind of ironic that this is in the context of a hearing on the U.S. before the U.S. Senate on the nomination of Todd Blanche to be Attorney General. He's the acting Attorney General now. And 1,200 former DOJ, righteous people, apparently are worried and troubled by the Trump administration. Before, when they're 2016 to 24, now Lori Lightfoot, that sanctimonious, virtuous former mayor of the failed mayor, I might add, in the city of Chicago, she's worried about the people in DOJ now and whether they're acting faithfully. And out should come this information, much to the surprise of some of the current senators, that they were illegally taped under the administration of Joe Biden, who was administered as DOJ by Merrick Garland, who wanted to be on the U.S. Supreme Court. And many would say he was inappropriately denied that. It's kind of ironic. I didn't hear much of the major networks, ABC, NBC, CBS, as they reported on this yesterday. Did they highlight any of what we're talking about? I must have missed it.
You know, the Vice President of the United States, J.D. Vance, is now been appointed by President Trump to head up investigations into fraud. And this stemmed initially from the outcry of the amount of fraud happening in our Medicaid programs, as was exposed by Nick Shirley, the independent journalist, as he went through, and we all as a nation saw these videos where he went to these daycare centers in Minnesota, and there were no kids there. They even couldn't spell learning. It was the Leering Center. Yesterday, also happening in the Senate, was a committee hearing on fraud, and Nick Shirley was called to testify. And he was asked by Senator Ron Johnson of Wisconsin about this bill being pushed, ironically, by the wife of the California State Attorney General. And this bill would make it illegal for journalists like himself, Nick Shirley, to be reporting on fraud. Here's what Nick Shirley had to say.
Yeah, so that's a bill that's been created by Mia Bonta, the wife of the Attorney General of California, and the official title is AB 2624, and it's to make it essentially illegal to expose and to film outside of immigration support service providers. That means any entity that provides services to illegal migrants, whether that be healthcare or legal fees. If I were to go out and film a video in front of one of these locations, perhaps an NGO like Churla that's received over $80 million from the government, and they give me a piece of paper and they say, hey, you cannot publish that video. If that bill passes, it'll be illegal for me to.
So it really ought to be renamed the Protect Medicaid Fraudster Act. Would probably be a better description of that, correct?
Correct.
So Jeff, I guess you and I better not do any original reporting anymore, because if we want to talk about fraud, it might mean that we're going to be sharing a jail cell. If we don't want to be doing anything to upset the illegal ways of getting money out of the federal government. But this is shocking that the state of California, that so-called responsible lawmakers would consider putting a law against a reporter for reporting on fraud. And Quincy, I understand you at one point met Nick Shirley. What can you tell us?
Yeah, I mean, I met Nick Shirley just a few weeks ago at a roundtable discussion here in Chicago. And, he's 24 years old, and he's doing basic journalism that all those journalists who didn't do what he did should be embarrassed and ashamed of themselves for. He should have been given an award. Instead, the California Senate and California Assembly, California legislature, working on legislation, as the clip just said, this legislation should be called the Protect Medicare Fraudster Act. What the hell are these Democrats doing in the California legislature? Do they understand the First Amendment? He's not trespassing. He's going up and asking people comments, asking them their questions about fraud that may be going on right behind their back. That's a terrible thing, and they want to prevent him from doing that. If somebody asks him to leave, he'll leave. He's not hiding. He's not even hiding this. He's putting a mic there. If they want to say, I don't want to be interviewed, go away, he'll go away. They spoke voluntarily.
It's shocking for me.
What is going on?
Well, I don't, and that's the question we ought to be asking across the nation. What is going on that you have people not wanting to have pass laws against the First Amendment, the freedom of the press? No, you can't get freedom of press. Don't expose anything that we're doing under the table. You can't. You got to now violating the federal law of the Supremacy Clause. What's going on here is you got in these states, when these lawmakers think they don't want to follow federal law, they're just going to ignore it or try to overrule it. And the Supreme Court has slapped down in various lawsuits over the last number of years, cases like this. But it's shocking that we have people in public office that don't want to follow the U.S. Constitution and live in a culture of corruption themselves, that they try to squash those who would expose it.
Well, of course, we should say the Democratic Party now, on some recent votes on Israel, half of the Democrats in the House oppose, they want to slash spending assistance by the United States to Israel. And what else? This is the Democratic Socialist Alliance that seems to be guiding the Democratic Party these days. And the Democratic Socialist Alliance platform, DSA, they want to cut out the U.S. Senate. They want to cut out the presidency. They want to create a House that would oversee, to the extent there is a president or an executive. This is a joke. And how Democrats across the country, they don't control the Democratic Party, the socialists yet, but they are now a significant bloc, and the Democrats don't seem to give a damn.
We're going to have to close it out. Jeff and I will appreciate you making comments, folks. Appreciate you sharing the video, if you will. And Jeff, until next time, we'll have to say goodbye.
Goodbye.